the cloud. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, taking a focus look at Creo Illustrate to help you create digital work instructions. My name is Rob Romanowski. I'm the Director of Sales Operations for 3HTI, and leading our presentation and overview today is Paul Dye, who is a solutions consultant and a applications engineer with PTC's Virtual Center of Excellence. So one of the cool things about Creo Illustrate that Paul will also discuss is that it works with SolidWorks. It can work with any CAD system. It doesn't necessarily have to work specifically with Creo. And basically it allows you to take your CAD files and create 3D technical illustrations for training manuals and for a whole host of other applications that you may need. So not to steal Paul's thunder, I'm going to let him take the control now. If you have any questions, type those into the Q&A box as we go, and we'll be sure to answer them during the presentation or at least at the end. Paul, it's all yours, my friend.
All right. You can hear me well and can see my screen?
Yes, I can, and I hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for having me on, and happy to go through a little bit around Creo Illustrate today. So it is a very powerful tool, something that has very purpose-built capabilities. It's definitely different than a lot of the different topics that we talk about in Creo. Whereas if you see Creo in front of the name, it's probably talking to a design engineer, someone that's actually going through and working on the CAD. But this has a little bit different of a focus. It has other users that are going to be more so into the illustrators, the people that are building things out for service documentation, work instructions, things of this nature. We really do need purpose-built tools for doing that type of work. So that's really what I'm going to go through and talk about in Creo Illustrate today. I'm going to go through and explain the capabilities. We'll be able to go through and show what this looks like in the interface of Creo Illustrate. And if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to drop those in the Q&A, and we can get to those at any point as well. All right, so to start into it, looking at just technical illustrations in general, they're very important. And it could be for communicating information around your products, your parts, your services. Essentially throughout the organization, you need clear documentation. And oftentimes you need it in different styles, different formats. And one of the biggest problems is that it's a very slow and also very tedious process to go through and normally create these illustrations. And with that process being that slow, it's rare that you're ever working with the most up-to-date information in the manuals. Something that most companies do have, though, are rich, accurate CAD models, which have a lot of great information that we're able to work with. But the problem is the illustrators that are creating that documentation oftentimes either don't know or just simply don't work with the 3D modeling tool or CAD tool. Or even if they do work with CAD, it oftentimes doesn't really give you the tools that, say, the illustrator would really need to do their work. What that ends up leading to is you have your engineers or your designers being the ones that actually create that technical publication content. That's not really what we want to be doing either. We're really using the wrong tool to do that. The designers should be designing in CAD, making their parts, making their assemblies, not building out the illustrations that would be used in a manual. And plus, it tends to be a fairly serial process where you can't even start into the illustration process until that design process is complete. So all that time that you could spend working on the illustrations and the documentation, you end up just waiting around. And one of the biggest reasons for that serial process is because if you have any changes to that design, you have to have manual updates normally. That's the way the world works nowadays. Your parts and your models are always being changed around and updated. So we have to be able to account for that. Or even worse, we see sometimes that models or assemblies get changed and updated, but then the service manual doesn't. That can cause grief for customers, users, something we need to be able to avoid. And we really have a solution to all those different challenges here with Creo Illustrate. Now, in general, this is a Creo application that's designed to create detailed illustrations directly from our 3D CAD data. I'm going to be using all that CAD data, but I'm not necessarily going to need to work with the actual CAD itself. Illustrate in of itself is really built out for the non-CAD user to utilize. It's an illustration tool built to give your illustrator the tools that they actually use and really care about. And one of the things that Rob mentioned earlier is the fact that Illustrate doesn't even really care where the CAD came from. Could be from Creo, but it could be a third-party CAD file, it could be a step, neutral file format, product view file. doesn't matter. We're just able to bring that in graphically and let us do our illustrations right with it. And the results that you're going to get from working with Creo Illustrate is very rich 2D and 3D technical illustrations. It's not all just lines and arcs. We can actually import the full bill of material structure. You have full control over the graphics. Very easy to go through, translate pieces if you need to, move things around, rotate components. It's still very easily controlled from that. But at the same time, going through and including what you need from an illustration perspective. It's very easy to build out things like callouts, something that you could manually define, or even have Creo Illustrate build them out for you. So it understands those components, it understands the assemblies, the sub-assemblies. So it's very quick to get to things such as that exploded view that include all those callouts and do it a little bit more automated if you'd like to as well. Right, we also have an extendable library for different symbols or graphics that you might want to work with here as well. The different hands, tools, arrows that you can utilize. It's something that we have available right out of the box with Creo Illustrate, but it's also completely extendable. There's symbols or graphics that you have access to or that you want to use. Feel free to add those in as well. And then from that point as well, we also have very extensive graphical techniques that we can work with from there as well. We can build out things like animations or build out these different figures, and really working with things like thick and thin lines for changing how certain parts of the model are rendered. That's something that would be important to an illustrator. The CAD designer might not care about thick and thin lines, but if you're building these out to be put onto paper or PDF, let's really go ahead and give you the ability to create what's going to look best there as well. Right? And also there's the idea of working with animations here too. You can do a whole assortment of different animation steps, display a process. You can have an assembly, show how everything goes together, or maybe gets taken apart. You can put all those different steps in and show how you need to use the different tools and what that would look like ultimately for your front end user that's doing that. Right. And one thing here as well is that Creo Illustrate can be fully integrated in with our PLM and service systems. So this means that you can keep all that information over in Windchill. You can get data from Windchill if you'd like to. So if you work with that, everything's able to be tied together from that perspective. And once you're able to get these built out and you're ready to publish the illustration, you then have different options for publishing, all from that one single illustration file. You can save off the 3D information, 2D vector, 2D raster, image files, product view files, however you need to send it off downstream. We're able to work into those different types of methods for getting those shared out. All right, from here I can go through and walk through a quick demonstration that shows the workflow of working with Creo Illustrate, shows some of these different techniques that I mentioned. Again, if you have any questions on anything that I went through and talked about there, feel free to drop those in. But I can give you a little bit more context into what we're actually looking at here with Creo Illustrate. So you can see if you've worked with Creo in the past, a lot of the main type of UI elements are still going to be there. You have your left-hand side for the different figures that you might want to be working with on a day-to-day basis. You still have your bill of materials that you can go through. It's essentially like your model tree where your different assemblies or parts will be laid out. And it's a fully integrated 3D tool for bringing in any of that 3D source material and giving us the ability to create our illustrations from that material. So you can see with these models, you can still assemble things, you can move parts around, you can transform or rotate them. You can also go through and hide or show anything that you want to focus on. If you only want to see a particular subsection of the assembly, feel free to hide anything that might not be important. And from there, we have the ability to go through and change how we're viewing the model and changing the render mode for the assembly. So here we can do, say, a shaded with edges. So you can still have all that rich model with all the colors, but highlighting more on some of those hard edges. Or maybe it's going to go into a service manual. So you want to show all those edges up very nicely, but just keep them in black and white. Another thing here is that the creation of exploded lines that you might use in that process, it's very straightforward. It's because all the different parts in the model, they understand their home locations. So the fact that it's coming from that model makes it very quick and easy to go through and change things up if we need to. All right, from here, if you wanted to restore the location of one of those parts after you've moved them around, that's just going to be a click away. You can see that it goes right back to where it started. You can even choose to have all the different parts that have moved return to their starting location. It's really whatever suits you best. You do have the option to change where those home locations are initially. So you can go through and essentially assemble two parts together. Even if they weren't initially together, you do have that capability. But looking at a few other capabilities that we have here, we first have our symbol feature for bringing in the different symbols or figures into my model. So here we can go through and work with some of the ones that we have out of the box. We have some tools that you can add in, say for a service step that you want to build out. We do also have some basic signs that you can bring in for the different figures. And with either of these, you can bring in your own files as well. So very extendable from that sense. And then in terms of what we're actually working with here, in terms of the architecture of, say, one of these illustration projects, here we can see what we have access into. So first and foremost, we have our source material. And again, you can see with any of these that we actually have a link to the initial file that it was published from, right? So you can see that this is the other side of it as well, where if you have a model that you brought in and you built out your illustration or your figure around, one of the things that is really important here is the fact that if you have that source material updated, we're linked into that. So if you do have a part that gets moved or a feature that gets updated, we can have that to be fully associative down to the figures that we're building from it. So it doesn't require you to rework and build everything out from scratch again. You can instead just have access to that model, have that pushed down the line, and then have your changes automated there as well. All right, down here we have the different figures. These are all different figures that we have as part of the single illustration file. Again, could be different callouts or sequences, animations, 2D drawings. It's whatever that we have really included in this project. All right, and then finally, you can see we have a couple other properties that you can always get access into and reference while you're working there as well. All right, so we can keep moving on here. We have a couple different figures that we have over here on the left-hand side. I want to go through and walk through a couple different examples that we have in this one project. First figure that we have here is this phantom part mode that we have on the outside ski tracks. Gives us a nice view through the track. I can even go through and select on parts through that, but still have it in relation to the track on the outside. So very useful for showing things like internal components, especially as your assemblies get larger. And with this particular figure, I also have a 2D drawing that's been built off of that 3D parent. Creo Illustrate has very strong two-dimensional long line drawing modes. It's going to project our 3D model onto a 2D vector projection. So in this particular mode, I have the hidden lines removed. It makes it very nice for me to work with the model. Still do have the ability to go through and clean up any lines. I can delete things or add in things as I see fit there as well. And one of the greatest things here about that 2D drawing mode, similar to like I mentioned with the source material, is that this can be linked to that 3D parent that we have. That means if I were to come back here into the assembly and move some things around here, take the wheel and show it in more of an exploded or a move state, really whatever changes that I would like to make, what's going to happen is that the 2D drawing is going to say, hey, I'm out of date. So what it'll do is re-render itself based on that configuration that we changed for the parent. So really, again, just a great way to make sure that you're getting all that information, making sure that you're staying consistent throughout. And that's what you can see here, checking back on the drawing, view now updates for those changes and what it looks like with that new configuration. All right, moving on from here, we can see that Illustrate also supports formatting illustrations for particular page sizes. You see that's the basis for what we have here, some of these different detailed views. And these are actually all inset views that are referencing the same parts of the assembly. So whenever you select on a part in one view, you get two other perspectives in those other views as well. Makes it very clear where those parts are located. The other function that we have here being shown off is the fact that these annotations are tied to the model parametrically. So they have all these different attributes that we use for defining that. Any of those parts, if you select on it, you can see all the different attributes associated with that particular part. It could be metadata from the part itself. It could be attributes from Windchill, things like part name or category or values, different things that you can go through and see for each of those individual parts. And in this example, we have the native name, the part name, and the feature ID being shown right there on the rest of our assembly. All right, next we have another area that I want to go through and show off here into the animations and sequences that we can build out. Really, animations in general are going to give you the ability to bring these models and assemblies to life. And then the sequences can break those animations up into step-by-step procedures that you can use in a lot of different ways. So in the sequence here, you can see the first step is going to highlight and remove a nut and a washer. And then from there, the second step gives us more information about the spring, gives us a warning attached to that spring. So these different types of steps can be used from a series of images and an instruction manual all the way down to full augmented reality experiences that we could support over in something like Vuforia Studio. Right, so a lot of different ways you could use it. And what I'd like to do now is take a step back here and look at our step editor. This is where we can manage all the different steps in that procedure. We can see all the different effects and the timing for each of the steps. So if we go ahead and look at this one here, we can see all the different camera tracks that make up that animation, and it's going to see it flash, expand out, and then finally fade away. Same thing over here for step 2 in the process. If we change the different steps, our keyframe editor down there in the middle, it's going to update for the different effects that are being used. In this case, it means changing the color of the spring and having that caution sign appear. And these are very easy to add in, work with here as well. I can go through and show very quickly what it looks like to create a new step. Maybe in my case, I want to show that caution sign fading away, and we want to highlight on the next nut that needs to be removed. As you can see, these effects are very easy to access. You just select what you want right up from the top there. Illustrate makes it very straightforward to get those added in and formatted. And it's really bringing these models to life. It's not just words or maybe a picture on a page. It's rich, meaningful content. It's going to leave a lot less up to the imagination and really does a great job of showing each step there as well. All right, last figure that we have here is more of a traditional exploded view, showing off all the different parts that we have in.
Hey,
Sure, you
Paul.
hear me okay?
Yeah, you cut out there for a minute.
Yeah, sorry. I think my headset reset for a moment there.
No worries.
Awesome. Yeah, so again, just keeping forward here for the last view that we have here. This is kind of a bill of materials view that we have here for this exploded view. And we have the capability of going through and attaching any of the annotations there on the part. It's something that you might go through and consume in a parts catalog viewer. You just select on the parts, they're going to highlight right in that view as well. So you can see that table of information attached with that, all things that we can work with and have stored in this single illustration file. And again, if I wanted to go through and share these things out, get them published for whatever application it's been designed for, you can see that we support different 3D outputs, two-dimensional vector outputs, raster outputs. We have video for the animations and the sequences as well. And whenever you go through and publish, we can just simply select which figures that we want to send to which formats. So for instance, with one of these, say I want to go through and select it for just one or the other. And if you want to go through and format these as well, you can do that down to a pretty low level here too. Right, we can go through and have different control depending on the type of content that you're working with. Different things here for height, width, aspect ratio. You can do that for an image. If you're doing more so for a 2D illustration, you might have options for hidden line removal. Again, all that being done just to make sure that what you're ultimately sending out in terms of the end product is exactly what you'd like there. So easy to show that off however you might need to downstream there. All right, so again, just a few different examples of what we can do there in Illustrate. And really, there's a ton of value that you have from working in this process and a lot of different benefits that we see our users getting access into. And first and foremost, it's just having the illustrations that you're ultimately building out linked to that 3D source material, right? Makes it faster for me to begin, to build out all those illustrations, and even that much faster to make updates to the illustration whenever there's changes made to the initial CAD files that you started with. Right, we can do that process completely independent from the original engineering resources if we'd like to as well, or even if you're getting files from Creo, getting another file from a third party, you can work completely in your own environment. It's completely pain-free from my end as the illustrator, and it's really cutting back also on duplicate work, right? No longer need to go through and build out a new illustration whenever the CAD designer needs to make changes to it. Allows me, illustrator, to maximize the use of these illustrations in whatever documentation that I'm building it out for. Allows me to include more pictures, more detail, increasing the accuracy. And in terms of what it's doing for us, and on the front and the back end here, we're increasing and really accelerating the time to market, because you don't have to wait to ship out a product because you're waiting on a service manual to be completed. We just have the illustrations and the documentation being done a little bit more concurrently there. It's also going to help our customers and users. It's going to make them happier. There's nothing worse than having manuals or instructions that are incomplete, incorrect, or outdated. We want everything to be accurate, and at the end of the day, more graphically clear there as well. All right, so that goes through most of what I wanted to go through and talk about around Illustrate. Again, it's something that we have a ton of people and a ton of our user base working with, and something that really does give you a lot of extended capabilities there as well. So if there's any questions, feel free to drop those in. But with that, I can pass it over to you, Rob.
Paul, thank you very much. Great overview. and explanations as always. So if anybody wants to see a custom demo of Creo Illustrate regarding even specific CAD files that you have, or SolidWorks files, whatever files that you have, we're more than happy to do that for you. You can contact us by emailing us at info@3hti.com. That's just info@3hti.com. Or you can reply to the email that I sent you as an invitation for this webinar. All those replies come directly to me. So I guess that's going to be it. So Paul, thank you very much for the overview and the insight. And we will see everybody in we're going to see everybody in mid-September, probably the second week. Actually, I'm going to pull up the calendar and just see. We are doing our next Creo webinar. Sorry, I wasn't thinking about this, but it just came to mind. Creo Flow, which is a really good product for CFD. We're going to take a look at the Creo Flow suite on the 7th of September. So we'll be sending out that webinar invite soon, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thanks, everyone. Take care.